Welcome to our deep dive into the 1988 Seoul Olympics. Well, more specifically, the dirtiest race in history, right?
Yeah.
Ben Johnson's 100-meter victory,
Right.
and then that crazy disqualification.
Yeah.
You sent us a great article that really goes deep on everything.
Uh-huh.
From the actual race to all the scandals afterward.
That's wild.
Get ready for some twists and turns. This goes way beyond just a positive drug test.
Yo, absolutely. It totally changed how the world saw performance-enhancing drugs in sports. It wasn't just a scandal.
Okay, so before we get into all that fallout, let's rewind a bit.
Okay.
Set the scene, right?
Yeah.
Two sprinting giants, Ben Johnson and Carl Lewis. Their rivalry, legendary.
Absolutely. And they had such different styles, too,
Oh, yeah.
Made it even more interesting. Johnson, pure explosive power. Those lightning-fast starts.
Oh, I see.
Lewis, on the other hand, he was known for that smooth, elegant style,
Oh, yeah.
Gradually gain speed, often win in the last few meters.
Wow. Knowing what we know now, it's almost hard to imagine the level of anticipation going into that race. What was it like back then?
Oh, the atmosphere was electric. Everybody knew this was going to be historic.
Right.
So much tension. And then Johnson explodes off the blocks, just dominates the race, sets a new world record, 9.79 seconds, leaves Lewis and everybody else in the dust. At the time, it really felt like the greatest sprint race in history.
And Canada went wild, right?
Oh, yeah.
First Olympic gold in athletics in over 50 years.
Crazy.
I even read that Canada's Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, called Johnson right after the race to congratulate him.
Yeah.
Talk about a moment of national pride. That turned sour quickly.
It did. 3 days later, the news breaks. Johnson tested positive for stanozolol, a banned anabolic steroid, and, well, everything changed.
The article you sent mentions that public opinion flipped completely. What was it like witnessing that shift?
It was pretty remarkable. I mean, one day, he's a national hero. Newspapers calling him a national treasure. The next day, those same publications are using words like bastard to describe him. The power and the fragility of a sporting hero's image, right?
It's fascinating and honestly a little bit sad. So let's get into the details of that positive test. Johnson has always maintained he was sabotaged, right?
He has. And there are some things that make you wonder.
Like what?
Well, for instance, Johnson's doctor at the time said that Johnson had a really bad reaction to stanozol in the past.
Oh, really?
Debilitating muscle spasms. So it seems unlikely he'd risk taking it again, especially right before such a major event.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I read he'd passed 19 drug tests leading up to the Seoul Olympics.
Exactly. If he was using, wouldn't he have been more careful about the timing?
Yeah.
Knowing how often he was being tested? It doesn't add up.
Right.
And then there's that whole thing with the mysterious man in the drug testing room.
Okay, let's talk about that. The detail about that yellow gooey substance is just like another layer of mystery to this whole thing. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. So Johnson says he was in the drug testing room, and this guy comes up to him and offers him a beer.
Okay.
Later, he notices this weird yellow gooey substance at the bottom of the bottle, which led him to believe he was deliberately given something that would make him fail the test.
Okay, so who was this mystery man?
Years later, in his autobiography, Johnson says it was Andre Jackson,
Okay.
someone he claims was connected to Carl Lewis. Interestingly enough, even Lewis confirmed that Jackson was in the testing room,
Huh.
though he did say it was inappropriate.
Yeah.
Reporters tried to get a comment from Jackson. He just gave this really cryptic response, saying he had moved on and that Johnson should control his destiny.
That's strange. The article also mentioned a reincarnation theory.
Yeah. In his 2010 book, Johnson claimed he's the reincarnation of the Egyptian pharaoh Khufu, and that Lewis and Jackson are the reincarnations of people who plotted against him in his past life.
While it's an interesting theory, it kind of takes the focus off the actual facts.
Yeah.
This is already pretty wild. We got this intense rivalry, a world record-breaking performance, a shocking downfall, a mysterious figure, and now reincarnation. What else could this story possibly have?
Well, it turns out Johnson wasn't the only one with a doping connection from that race. 6 of the 8 finalists were later linked to doping scandals.
6 out of 8. That's incredible. So who else was involved?
Carl Lewis, actually.
No way.
He admitted to testing positive for banned stimulants before the 1988 Olympics even.
Wow.
He was allowed to compete because of a technicality.
Oh, really?
But yeah, it definitely casts a shadow.
So even the guy who got the gold medal wasn't totally clean.
Right.
That's crazy. Who else was involved?
Linford Christie, he got the silver in Seoul, later served a 2-year ban for using nandrolone,
What's that?
another anabolic steroid, pretty common back then, used to increase muscle mass and strength.
It's unbelievable to think that so many of these athletes were using banned substances.
And there's more. Dennis Mitchell came in fourth.
Yeah.
He tested positive for testosterone later on. Desai Williams, who finished sixth, admitted to using during the Dubin inquiry.
What was that?
That was a Canadian government investigation, looked into the use of drugs in sports.
I see.
And Ray Stewart, he finished last,
Right.
was eventually banned for life
Wow.
for supplying performance-enhancing drugs to athletes he was coaching.
Wow. So out of all the finalists, only 2 haven't been linked to doping. Calvin Smith, who got the bronze after Johnson was disqualified, and Robson da Silva, who came in 5th. It's almost more surprising that anyone stayed clean. Why do you think that is?
I mean, you have to think about the pressure these athletes were under.
Yeah.
The desire to win, to be the best.
Mm.
It could push people to make bad choices. And the culture of the sport at the time definitely played a role too.
In what way?
Well, I think a lot of athletes felt like they had to use performance-enhancing drugs to compete on an even playing field.
Right.
And of course, the testing procedures back then weren't as sophisticated.
That's true.
So yeah, it was a different time.
This must have been devastating for fans of the sport. Did this scandal change how the world saw athletics?
It definitely had a huge impact. The '88 Olympics were a turning point in the fight against doping. The scale of this scandal, it forced athletic organizations to finally take it seriously.
What kind of changes did we see because of this?
Well, testing protocols got way stricter. They developed new testing methods. Athletes had to go through more frequent and random drug tests. And the penalties for doping got a lot harsher too.
Oh, yeah.
Before Seoul, suspensions were usually pretty short.
Mm-hmm.
But now athletes caught doping could face lifetime bans.
I guess they had to make the consequences so bad that it wasn't worth the risk. It's sad it took a scandal like this to make real change.
It is. But we learn from these mistakes, right? We got to keep working towards a cleaner sport. We owe it to the athletes who compete fairly
Yeah,
and the fans who believe in the integrity of the competition.
absolutely. So after Seoul, did Ben Johnson ever try to make a comeback?
He did. After serving his initial 2-year ban, he came back in 1991. Wasn't a smooth return, though. He did some strange events, almost like publicity stunts.
Like what?
There was one race where he competed against 2 horses
Wait, what?
and a stock car.
He raced against horses and a car.
Yeah, it was bizarre. He actually came in 3rd, but only because the car got stuck in the mud.
That's
A
wild.
strange chapter, for sure.
Yeah.
He also tried to qualify for the '92 Barcelona Olympics.
Was he able to recapture his old glory?
Not even close.
Yeah.
Finished last in his semifinal heat. His time was almost a full second slower than his world record in Seoul.
Wow, that's a huge drop in performance.
Yeah,
Hard to
yeah.
know how much of that was because of the ban and how much was just, psychological.
Probably a combination of factors. But his comeback was short-lived, unfortunately. In '93, he tested positive again for excess testosterone.
Oh, no.
Got a lifetime ban from the sport.
Carl Lewis had some interesting comments when he was asked about Johnson's second ban, right?
He did. Something like, Ben had to start running better or start looking for a job. If he used drugs, I'm glad he got caught.
That's pretty harsh considering Lewis himself was implicated in a doping scandal, even if it was under different circumstances.
Yeah, it's interesting. Makes you wonder, would we even remember Ben Johnson today if he hadn't been caught? Would he be celebrated as a legend? His name etched in Olympic history alongside other sprinting greats.
It's a fascinating thought experiment. His story is full of what-ifs and could-have-beens. This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening. What stands out to you the most?
Yeah, it really is a story with so many layers. It makes you think about a lot of things, like what's the real price of victory, and where's the line between pushing limits and just cheating? It also makes you wonder how common doping actually was back then.
Right.
If 6 out of 8 finalists in that one race were involved, what does that say about the sport as a whole?
It's a good question. It definitely seems like doping was a widespread problem, not just a few isolated cases. The '88 Olympics might have been a turning point in terms of awareness and changes.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder how many other athletes got away with it before the testing got more serious.
That's a tough thought. But thinking back on Ben Johnson's story specifically, you can't help but feel like it's kind of tragic, right?
Yeah, it is.
He did this incredible thing, broke a world record,
Mm-hmm.
but it was all overshadowed by the doping scandal. It is. And I think his story is a cautionary tale. The allure of shortcuts, that desire to be the best is a powerful thing. But when you sacrifice your integrity to get there, the cost can be huge.
Makes you think about the long-term consequences, too. Even if he hadn't been caught, could he have lived with the secret? Would that victory have even felt real?
That's a question only he can answer. But his actions really did have a ripple effect, not just on his own life, but on the sport as a whole. His legacy will always have that shadow hanging over it. And it reminds us that actions have consequences, especially when you're in the public eye.
I guess the lesson here is that real greatness isn't just about winning, it's about how you win.
Well said. And I think that's worth remembering, not just in sports, but in anything we do. There's no shortcut to real success.
I think we've covered a lot of ground today, but this is one of those deep dives that just makes you want to keep digging. Have you ever thought about the motivations of the people who supplied these athletes with banned substances? Who were they, and what were they trying to achieve?
It's an area that definitely deserves more attention. There's a whole network of people involved in making, distributing, and giving these drugs to athletes.
Right.
Their stories are often just as complicated, just as interesting as the athletes themselves.
It reminds us that there's always more to the story. The deeper you go, the more questions you find.
Exactly. And I think that's what's so great about these deep dives. They make you curious. They make you think critically. And they leave you with things to think about long after the conversation is over.
I couldn't agree more. Hopefully this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the dirtiest race in history. It's a story full of drama, controversy, and important lessons that apply to all of us, not just athletes. Maybe it'll inspire you to do some exploring of your own. Who knows what you